morning, guys. Mama here. So continuing with my Mama vlog, really trying to stay on top of my videos and everything. Um, Today I want to talk about my experience currently moving house after 34 years of living here, soon to be 35 years. So this home that I'm currently in is my childhood home. We moved here when I was a year old, um, and I'm going to be 36 at the end of this month, so it's very easy for me to do the math. This is basically the second house my dad has ever lived in. So this home holds quite a bit of significance. However, um, we're always like lower working class financially, and so we had a lot of financial hardships and things like that. And essentially, there are parts of the home that should have been maintained, but we just couldn't. For instance, the roof is original to the house. So the roof is 20 years overdue for being replaced. So it comes up with all sorts of problems, leaks, blah, 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 which causes other problems, which causes other problems, other problems, other problems, right? It's a snowball effect. Um, in addition to those periods of financial hardship also set us back, with things like property taxes, things like that, which we were lucky in the sense that when my aunt passed, the sale of her home, bought out our house, satisfied a lot of those debts, and all these other things, and so there's a lot of ups and downs in the family history financially that led us to essentially get to the point where our home is now a money pit. It is not conducive for us to stay here. There's too many things wrong with it, and our best option is to sell it. That being said, um, along with all that, there's also just the fact of life. And with life comes a lot of traumatic hardships. My mother, I fully believe, was a hoarder. And it's because she came from a little village in the middle of nowhere in Mexico. And so she grew up with nothing. She had to leave school after the third grade. So she never started fourth grade to help her family farm. Okay, so this is back in the 1950s. My father was able to receive full education, but both his parents were legally blind, and technically also so was his sister. His sister was far more capable, though, than his mother, but he ended up taking care of his parents until he moved out of that home to try to, raise his extending family. And so my father has a different type of hoarding. I do believe he is also a hoarder, but of a different sense. So after going through all of this stuff, the loss of my mother, the having to deal with the financial status of the house, the practical status of the house, and I've experienced my own personal traumas that make me want to leave my childhood home. I will not go into that, but understand it's bad enough that I need a new fresh start, and it's heartbreaking to me because this was a home my father had hoped to give to me. I'm the youngest of four siblings, but we both understood that I was going to eventually be his caregiver. And a reward for that is he would provide me with a home for the rest of my life. He's still going to accomplish that, and I don't want him to feel guilty for that, but it's just not happening the way that he thought. So, that aside, all of that accumulates to this whole experience I've been going through since even before September, probably about late July, definitely August, where I've been dealing with decluttering my house. The amount, the volume of stuff I've already removed from the house. Um, if I were to guesstimate, okay, imagine a 12 by 12 by 12 box, okay, nice cube, probably at least 200 of those, minimum, minimum. And that's not including furniture. That's just knickknacks and stuff. And throughout all of that, I have started to realize the amount of psychology that goes behind stuff and decluttering, and the amount of trauma responses that people put into gathering up more things, and the amount of healing that has to be done to be able to let go of those things, and the amount of patience that you really need to have to be able to go through this, and even more so to help a family member go through it. Because right now my father is grieving. He's never once been without my mother. Um, Not like in that like super heavy codependency type relationship, but they did everything together. They were husband and wife. They did all the things together, and they fought together, and they fought with each other for sure. But they have never really been separated. And those times that they were separated, my dad hit a depression. Thankfully, most of those times were very short lived. Like my mother made a solo trip to Mexico. He was depressed. Um, he would never admit it, but he was. He missed her so bad, and even now he misses her so bad. Um, Anyways, so with all that happening, I just want to mention a few of the sources of clutter that I have seen, experienced in the last, actually, quite a few years, because I've also been dealing with my poor vet husband, um, who suffers from PTSD and a traumatic childhood himself. So, like, I just have a couple of types of clutter I want to mention. I'm not going to go into detail, but there's some things to think about. So, there's essentially two major categories I've been able to throw them into. One is the fear of losing the past, and the other is the fear of the future. So it's I'm afraid I'm going to lose something by giving up something I already have, or the fear of the what ifs. So, one of the things that falls in the past category is generational or what feels like obligatory clutter. So, this is stuff like you have a china set handed down from grandma and you don't want to let it go because you're afraid you're going to lose your memories of your grandmother. Um, but china sets are impractical, easily breakable. You can't put them in the dishwasher. You have to do it by hand. And it takes time, commitment, energy to maintain this sort of thing. And what if it's not even your style? It doesn't define you. It only defines your grandmother, ultimately. But you feel like you have to hold on to it or you're going to lose your grandma. We all know this not to be true, but it feels true. So we have generational or obligatory clutter, as I like to call it. There's the fear of the future, the what ifs. What if I need this? Or what if this project comes up and this would be the perfect thing for that? Or like, just holding on to things for all the what ifs. Um, I have found that my dad falls into this category the most, the what ifs, because he is a hoarder of tools. Okay. He can have like 20 number two Phillips screwdrivers. How many do you actually need? One for each car and maybe two for the house. So that's four. And maybe an extra because those always go missing. But if he has like 20, he doesn't need all 20. But can he give that up? He's like, no, what if this one breaks or this one? You never get rid of tools. You never get rid of tools. And that comes from actually generational trauma from his parents who grew up during the Depression, where they wouldn't have things and they prepared for the what if scenarios because they weren't sure if they would have them. So, and then this is habitually learned through the generations. And then you get to Gen X, generation before me, which is my older siblings, and then millennials, my generation. And we came from seasons of plenty. And it's actually, Dad, whenever you need a screwdriver and you can't find the ones that you know for a fact you have, you go out and you buy a new one. This is how we ended up with so many. And when you have so much stuff, that's what happens is you can't locate the stuff you already have. So um, it piles up, it snowballs. So there's the fear of the future. Then going back to the past, there's the spending and guilt clutter. So this is I bought it with good intentions and then never used it. And now I don't want to get rid of it because I feel guilty for spending that amount of money on it. Get rid of it. Get rid of the guilt. Because every time you look at that, you're just going to make yourself feel awful and depressed. Declutterers say this all the time, but that is definitely something that's come up in this house. And then what also falls into that category of clutter is gift clutter. Somebody else spent this kind of money on me. I would seem ungrateful if I got rid of it. Chances are they don't remember giving it to you. Or it wouldn't be that terrible to simply ask that person, would you feel bad if I sent this off somewhere else because I don't use it and I don't want it to go to waste? I would like to send it off where somebody else would use it. And so the great thing me and my friends have done is we've come up with a clutter pact, which is if we gift each other something and after a time it loses its luster to us, we are not going to go after each other for having gotten rid of something we've gifted each other. We don't even have to have the courtesy of asking, hey, would you feel bad if I got rid of this? We do that, though. We do that of courtesy because we care about each other's feelings. But ultimately, we're like, it was gifted to you. It's yours. You do with as you please. I appreciate you asking me if I would feel bad. I'm a little sad, but you know what? It's what's best for you because you are my best friend and I care about you. And if it makes you feel better getting rid of it, by all means. So that was a nice pact me and my friends came up with. And actually having that conversation, oh my goodness, it gave us like freedom, sense of freedom. It was great. Um, Overconsumption clutter. That's the buying multiples because you forgot you already had it or you couldn't find it. Um, Specialty gadgets, the tools that do one job. And what's worse about this is you might buy this tool to do the one job, but you already have a tool that you use for multiple things that already do that job. And even though you bought that tool to do that job, you're still going to stick to the thing you already know. So it's just like, don't even bother because you know you're only going to stick to that spoon that you use for 20 other things to do what that one gadget does. don't bother with it. Um, it's just the excitement and the fun thing, a dopamine rush. Um, there is deferred decisions. That's what all clutter is deferred decisions. You just simply don't want to make a decision on it. You want to spend the time on it. You don't want to spend the energy on it. And what's worse, if you have ADHD, which I have discovered I have, I'm fairly certain my dad has autism. My hubby definitely has ADHD. Like, we're slowly realizing these things. Like, where did all these habits come from? Why can't we get away from this? I'm pretty certain it's because we're all neurodivergent and we live in a house of neurodivergency, and now it shows. Um, but that then contributes to the executive dysfunction. You get overwhelmed and you shut down, and now you can't make decisions. So, deferred decisions is very hard. I have found the easiest way to get through executive dysfunction is sort of body doubling, but it's a little bit different. If I need my hubby to declutter something, like let's say his nightstand, I will actually go in there first, pull out the obvious trash, like wrappers and strips of paper or used batteries or things. I will go through and pull out the obvious trash, nothing that is of possible personal value, but the obvious trash. And that gets a lot of the overwhelmed, anxious clutter out of the way. So now visually and mentally, he's like, oh, this is actually what I have to deal with. That was just stuff blanketed on top of it, so I couldn't see it, so I got anxious about what I actually had to do, and it's actually way less than he thought. So I've also found that works with my dad, which is another reason why I think he's neurodivergent. Because if I go in there and I start a project for somebody, they can then step in and at least get to a point before they have decision fatigue. And decision fatigue adds to the deferred decision problem, but you take breaks. And that's why I only declutter or clean for like 30 minutes and then done. Another thing is this attachment where you feel like it's worth more than what it is. There's a term for that, and I can't remember what it was, but there's a term for it. But my hubby suffers from this the most. He's military. Let's say he bought a piece of equipment, night vision goggles, for like $800 back in the 80s because that's what it cost. He wants to sell it for that $800. I'm like, honey, that depreciates. Okay, it's not worth $800. And what's more is you can get better, higher quality ones now for like $40. You're lucky if you sell those night vision goggles for $20. Okay, because you're not selling it new in the package, you're selling it used. That right there halves its value. And he's like, well, no, da da da. Somebody who really wants it. I was like, okay, but now you have to calculate, what is somebody willing to pay for it? They have to calculate shipping, which actually is going to end up on you to pay for. You have to dedicate time and energy to sell it. And then you have to have it sitting around until it sells, if it sells. So there are some things, yes, sell it for what you think it's worth, but there are other things like, no, sell it for what somebody's willing to give you for it. And that was a very, very hard lesson for him to learn. He's still learning it. He still approaches things with, well, I paid this much. I think it's valued at this much. It should be more expensive now. And I'm like, no. And the I hate doing this, but I have to constantly search whatever comparable item it is on Amazon, show them that price. And then I have to see if I can find the exact item on eBay, show them that price. And 9 times out of 10, it is significantly less. And then I have to show him how long it's been sitting there. Some of the things he feels like are going to be quick sells, been sitting there for months to years. So you really cannot sell something for what you think it's worth. Something is only as valuable as much as somebody's willing to pay for it. It has nothing to do with what you think about it. It has everything to do with what other people think about it. And God, I wish I could remember that term, but it's where you assess a higher value to something simply because you own it and it's yours. So that's something that also holds back the clutter. And value doesn't just come from how much you sell it for, but how useful you think something is. My father has the useful problem. My hubby has the financial association with that. Craft and project clutter is another thing. Is once again, all good intentions. You want to do it. You're into it. This is the worst with ADHD and neurodivergent. But are you actually going to? That's the question. The perfect example is my hubby had this military shirt made of a particular fabric that once it starts to disintegrate, there is no patching it. You cannot stretch the fabric back together. You put a patch on it, doesn't matter if those edges are frayed in any ways, it's going to continue to fray and it's going to fall apart. There's no patching it. And I explained this to him. He cannot sew. He can suture because it doesn't matter, but he cannot sew. He doesn't understand the difference between fabric and flesh, how different fabrics work to be mended. And I know the basics. And me knowing the basics, I can look at it and say, this is not mendable. You're only holding on to this for sentiment. That's it. This is not mendable. This is not practical. I'm not going to let you wear this thing with a hole as big as my head. That is not mendable. And you need to let it go. And he's like, well, then I'll fix it. I'm like, are you? Or is this something that you're going to send back my way because you're going to attempt to fix it and you're actually going to fuck it up worse because you don't know how to sew and you didn't accept the fact that I told you is not mendable? He sat there with that. And I was like, and if you send it back my way, I'm going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you now. It's going to be a circular conversation. And then you would have held on to it for how many more months before you attempted to fix it, number one. And then how many more months before you approached me to fix it? And I'm just going to tell you the same thing I told you a year ago. It's not fixable. And I did tell him this a year ago. But it has to be his decision to let it go. That's my frustration, and that's where the patience comes in with all of this. It has to be their decision to let go of their stuff. If you do it, resentment grows, and they'll hate you forever. And that was something I really need to drill home to my hubby, was that we keep reaching points where he just wants to burn the house down, get rid of all the stuff. I'm like, you can't do that, because now you're taking away the opportunity for my siblings and my father to process their grief by making these decisions on their stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of patience involved in all this, and I'm going to warn you now, it is tiresome, it is frustrating, it is awful, and it wears you down. But you have to be patient. You have to let other people process this, or it's just a shit show, for lack of a better word. And so my mother came from nothing. My father came from the fear of nothing. So now my father is experiencing grief of losing his wife. He's already lost his father, his mother, his sister. So he's lost all of his nuclear family from his childhood. And now he's beginning to lose his nuclear family from my childhood, his wife. And we've also pretty much have estranged one of my brothers, for lack of a better explanation. And he's come to terms with that. But he's said to me numerous times, he wants to keep everything because it meant something to his wife. And I said, Dad, that's not a good enough reason. If this house were on fire right now, and you were allowed to keep just one thing that meant the most to you, and it could only be one thing, what would you want that one thing to be? It could be anything. Let's say you're super strong, you can grab any one thing, okay? And I told him, I guarantee him, it's not going to be any of her shit, because it actually doesn't mean anything to him. And to be 100% honest, it didn't mean anything to her. It was a security blanket. It was hoarding. It didn't actually mean anything. There's some things that meant something to her, and those were the first things I packed up to come with us. I already knew what they were. So, and I sat there and I said, Dad, if I could only take one thing out of this house, no matter where I went, how big of a house I was going, there's only one thing I would take with me, and that's my grandmother's piano. Because to me, that's a legacy that I want to keep going. That not only did my grandmother and grandfather enjoy, they paid good money for during a hard time, you've enjoyed, my siblings enjoyed, I enjoyed, and my children, my child, and my nephews enjoyed. It's already been passed down emotionally. That is the one thing I would save in this entire freaking, if everything else burned down, that'd be the one thing I'd save. That's what means most to me. Can he pick out the one thing that means the most to him? The problem is he can't, because he never actually had to sit down and think about that. He never had to think about those decisions because he had a home. He could just keep everything in it. It's a giant storage unit. And this is actually an issue with a bunch of boomers. And it's because it came from that fear of the not having anything, or there might be a day where I have nothing. And then the value thing gets associated with it. And then they think that everybody else holds their stuff to the same value that they do, which is not the case. And that was something very hard that my dad learned very quickly. There are two china cabinets that were in this house. One came with a table that's at my sister's house. She wanted that table. She took that table. She did not have room for the china cabinet yet. So my mother held on to the china cabinet for my sister to take. My sister likes having matching furniture. So she waited for that china cabinet. Now it has to go to her house because it can't stay here. In the meantime, my mother picked up a bigger china cabinet for my sister. And my sister's like, I only want the one that matches the table. Why would I take this other one? So my mother insisted that she had to take this one instead of that one. But my mother filled it up with all of her stuff. Okay. So my mother passes away. We're trying to move house, blah, 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 blah. I was like, okay, Tina's taking that cabinet. She does not want that cabinet. She's not taking it. It is not going to her house. And my father insisted it would have to go to her house because that's what mom intended it for. It's like, no. Why would she have two cabinets? She already has a hutch full of stuff, not two cabinets. So I decided, ask all the family members. Nobody wants it. I was like, you see, Dad, already, nobody in the family wants that china cabinet. Nobody in the family values that heavy piece of furniture. Okay? It's not worth the carting around. And he's like, well, maybe you can sell it. Okay, I put it online, Facebook Marketplace, other places, $500 for what was probably a $2,000 piece of furniture. Okay, $500. No bites. $350. No bites. $100. $50. Please take this damn thing. Free. Just come pick it up. No bites. Nobody wanted it. And it's like, well, did you try selling it for long enough? I'm like, Dad, it's been up there since before Mom died. Middle of summer. Through the end of December. It has been online. I've been refreshing it to make sure it keeps getting seen. Nobody wants it. I couldn't even give it away. And that is a very hard truth that a lot of boomers are dealing with. And that's if you're a Gen Xer, older millennial, you're going to experience these problems. So, just take note. These are some difficult things to deal with. You're going to need a lot of patience. You're going to need therapy. Your boomer parent is going to need therapy for sure. Okay? As they lose their spouses, or even as you lose them, you're going to inherit their shit. Not just their financial shit, but the actual shit. And you're going to be like, why did they keep this? And so my dad accepted the fact that he's not going to live terribly long, much longer. So he's already started giving the things that he wanted to give to specific people to those people. And as we've been cleaning up this house, my nephews, his grandchildren, have already been picking up, oh, Grandpa, can I have that? Absolutely. Take it with you now. He wants to see the kids take it. And that's actually a very beautiful thing. Seeing people come in and want specific things that meant value to you. That's a beautiful thing. The hard part is dealing with the leftovers that you might have felt like, oh my goodness, why don't they want this? They just don't. And you have to accept that. So I've already talked way too freaking long, but that's the experience I've been having with decluttering. And that's all for now.